Longtime fans of the show should be familiar with the lender formerly known as Sue Pullen, and I'm pleased to announce that she's back, fresh off a rebrand and ready to help as Sue Mackey. Sue is a certified mortgage advisor at Fairway Independent Mortgage, an equal housing lender who focuses on finding the right product for you and your needs. She has over 20 years of experience helping thousands of homeowners. Whether it's purchasing, refinancing, or even a reverse mortgage, Sue will help. Sue's licensed in 36 states now, so reach out and let Sue Mackey it happen for you. The best way to reach her is just give her a call at 520-977-7904 or in an email, spullen@fairwaymc.com. Fairway Independent Mortgage has an MLS number of 2289. Sue Mackey has an MLS number of 206048. That email again, spullen@fairwaymc.com, and that phone number is 520-977-7904. Shoot Sue an email and let her know she needs to update that address. Disclaimer time. This is where I tell everyone to lighten up. It's just a podcast. Trading is like that roller coaster at the amusement park. Thrilling, unpredictable, and potentially stomach-churning. What works for one person might leave another clutching their hat in the wind. Our hosts and guests, they're awesome, knowledgeable, full of insights, but we're not financial advisors. So don't rush to make any investment decisions based solely on our banter. Always consult with a professional or do your own research. Plus, let's face it, we like to have fun, laugh, enjoy the trading ride together. It's all in the name of good podcasting fun. So remember, take it easy, don't bet the farm, and keep your seatbelts on at all times. Thank you for listening. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the China Shop, home of the Band of Traders podcast. I am your host, Kyle, and today I'm joined by a special guest, JM from the Vanta Discord. JM has a background in quant trading and has agreed to come on to talk about his experiences. Now, I've also called in reinforcements, as our friend Robert here has a much better background, should be able to follow the conversation a lot better than I can. But before we dive into that conversation, you guys have anything you'd like to promote? Anybody want to shout out? JM?
No, just the guys at Vanta. Great place to hang out.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Love hanging out over there. What about you, Robert?
Thanks, Kyle. I do have a project, actually, that some folks might find helpful. Over in the China Shop part of the Vanta Discord, I've been pulling together ideas and requests from members for custom CR chart studies. And I've put these together in a free collection that's available for anyone in the Discord. Some of these are a little more experimental, and some of these are actually used daily by some of the members. We've got a lot of great traders there, and some of them have some great ideas for custom studies. So anyway, if you're curious about trying this out, just get on the Vanta Discord and DM me, RobertR, and I'll get you set up.
Awesome. Yeah, there's some great studies on there. The Power Towers is one of my favorites. Sounds like you got that Liz tool working a little bit better, too. I think you changed the name of that, didn't you?
Yeah, I've been working on a tool in the background for a while. It's not part of the collection yet. And I might even still thinking about it if I want to make it like a premium idea. But the idea is to create a tool to help automate your trade size based on parameters like on the chart. For example, you can right click a bar and it will create a trade based on the height of that bar. So that'll be your stop, and then 2x that or whatever you want. 1.5 times that would be your target. And it would just create a trade for that.
It also creates the size. I think I played around with it when you're developing it, and it looks like it's going to be really fun.
Yeah, it looks really helpful. And the idea is to make it so that your sizes never exceed your risk parameters, whatever you want to set as your max risk for a trade.
Oh, I love that. That should be a standard feature on Sierra already, but
yeah,
we all know how those guys are over there. All right, so before we dive into the discussion here, then let me just finish up with the last of the business here. If you want to reach out with any suggestions, corrections, or questions for future guests, you can do that via email at suggestions@financialineptitude.com, or as mentioned, you can join our Discord server. We've recently merged with our friends over at Vanta Tradings, so our side is and always will be free. We'll have all those links in the episode description, so you can check them out at your own convenience. But now that we got all that crap out of the way, let's dive into the actual discussion. So, JM, take me back to the beginning. How did you get started on your journey into the markets?
In the beginning.
Not that far.
So I guess the story starts when I was at university. I have always followed what I've been interested in and have made decisions along that road. So got to the end of my degree. I did an interesting final year project, got offered to do a PhD. So went on and did the PhD. That ended up raising some more kind of interesting questions based off the work I did. So I ended up staying in academia and doing a research fellowship. But in the back of my head, I always knew that I had a kind of a get out of jail free card with academia, in that
Mm-hmm.
getting a PhD in maths was highly desirable in the world of finance. So I had a friend in finance already, and he'd show me these ads from the back of the Financial Times saying, "Hey, look, see what you could be earning here." And I was like, yeah, okay. And I never kind of I never pursued it too much because I was focused on what I was doing. But anyway, it got to the point where we kind of I felt like we finished the work, and I didn't really want to stay in academia because the career path was quite limited. It ended up being a lot more paperwork and a lot more writing than I liked. I liked the numbers, which is why I always ended up doing maths. And I ended up doing more and more of the things I didn't really like. So
all the research papers you have to write,
man, just endless and so bad. And it's only now that I have children that I realized how badly I was taught English. And
oh wow,
my son's learning all these kind of tools and techniques. And I'm like, oh my, it makes me realize now I never understood how to write. And then I was asked to write these, dissertations and papers for publication and stuff. And I now realize why they criticize me so badly. It's because,
what does a paper on math look like? What are you are you looking at, concepts or theories, or?
It was quite practical. So we were, I was sponsored by the UK Atomic Energy Association. So we were doing some kind of offshoot of work on fusion reactors. Which was
really?
Yeah, it sounds. I'm only bringing it up because it sounds fancy, but we were just analyzing some of the data that came off it and looking at building some simple models to better understand that phenomena. But it was so the papers were reasonably technical, but applicable. So we actually used population models. So immigration, emigration as a way to describe, things arriving into a population and then exiting, and whether by measuring what you exit or what leaves, can you infer certain information about the population itself, which is kind of what happens in a fusion reaction. You've got stuff coming off, and you want to be able to measure it and make some inference about what's going on inside. So we were doing a lot of that.
See, I find that fascinating because I have a background in nuclear background in the Navy when I studied in there. Yeah, not quite as fancy as fusion. We were more of a hot rock, glorified thermostat, I think they like to call us.
This is fusion reactions just basically generates ash because they can't control it, so it's always hitting the sides of the the spherical the donut basically. So they wanted to know how better they could control it, and they had all this data from the outside, and we could kind of produce a model that mimicked that behavior in a very simple way.
How long ago was this?
Early 2000s.
Okay, so how much closer are we now?
We're always 10 years away.
Okay, all right, that answers my question.
So
all right,
10 years
all right.
away.
So the maths thing got kind of boring because you're writing all these research papers on stuff that you don't want to do. How did you get into the markets?
So I spoke to my friend and I said, "Oh, have you got any contacts?" And he goes, "Yeah, okay, yeah." So I ended up getting an interview at an American investment bank and got the job. And it turns out that the head of the department that I ended up working for knew my supervisor at university, which was they actually did their PhDs together. So it was this kind of really small world. So it was a good job I'd actually told my boss at the time at university that I was going to do this, because the guy that phoned him for the reference was his kind of old colleague. So it was, it's this kind of small world of academia almost.
Yeah, it always seems like the more you get into any field, the smaller the world becomes. You start running across the same people all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And they were after guys with PhDs we were working in counterparty risk. So analyzing how much risk the bank had to other counterparties. And there was a lot of modeling that went on with that, and we had to do risk assessment. So I moved over, and it was quite a steep learning curve, but quite enjoyed that, having a fresh problem to look at. And then I've been there about 18 months, and it's almost like as soon as you start in one of these banks, you get headhunter calls.
Oh yeah.
And you don't know how they get your number, and anyway, they'd be calling all the time
from other banks.
Yeah, probably.
no, from headhunters, just like recruitment
They
agencies.
probably bought the data from your bank.
I think they just bought phone numbers. I think they just get the phone numbers like off, somebody down the local pub, and then they just cold call in the hope that they get somebody. Anyway, I'd mentioned it to my wife, and she was like, "You should just answer one of them and just see what they've got to say." So I did, and he had this really intriguing role at another bank, as it happened, but it was on a trading desk, a quantitative trading desk, and so I ended up going and went on quite a few interviews, and then eventually I got a call saying, "Oh, right, great, you've got the job." I was like, "Oh, cool." And
are you in the States at this time? Or are you
no,
still in?
No, never been. No, all in the UK.
Okay.
And then I went there, and when I turned up, it was they were building a brand new desk from scratch. They weren't trading. It was a tiny group. I think at the time there was maybe 8 of us, and my boss at the time was this fascinating character who had come from a hedge fund, and I think he'd come with an idea based on how the hedge fund traded, and he knew a bit of it, but not all of it, and he basically persuaded the bank that he could build this, and he brought along a couple of guys, and they'd hired some guys they'd worked with before, and then they'd hired me as a quant and this other Russian guy as a quant, and we basically were thrown into building this thing from scratch, and I didn't really. That was another steep learning curve. So
I bet
I had to learn.
It sounds like he didn't quite know exactly what he was building either.
No, he didn't. It was like Field of Dreams. It was like build it and they will come. It was like build it and it will work. So we were all working on. So there's obviously there's a massive amount of work that goes into this. So there's nothing off the shelf. Everything is custom software that's been written in-house. So there's the trading links, there's the market data links, there's the internal risk software, there's the communicating with the bank software to settle the trades at the end of the day. And then there's the actual trading engine, which is making the decisions. And then there's what we would call the alphas, which are all the signals, which is what comes together essentially to make that trading decision. Now, I was brought on to help build those signals and the strategy that we were trading, and we had some kind of these couple of ideas for signals, and we had the developers creating all the exchange links and testing the exchange links and making the code as performant as possible, because this was the whole game that we were playing was a speed game. So it was how we were aiming to be the quickest to market. So at the time we were just on the Eurex exchange in Frankfurt. So what this entailed was having servers co-located at Frankfurt, and then we would then have command and control from the London offices. We then expanded that operation there to the CME and CBOT. So then we had servers in Aurora, which is the data center for CME and CBOT.
Right.
And then we would then...
So you have to have them close by like that because you want the transmission delay, right?
We have to be as close to the crossing engine as possible for each exchange. So...
how much time does that actually save you, like versus a server in the UK?
All right, I'll get to it. So,
Okay.
So then we would have optical fiber connections between the locations. And to begin with, so from CME, that would be to London, and then we would have then London to Frankfurt. And latterly, we tested and swapped over to another company who had a direct line between CME and Frankfurt, and that saved us 5 milliseconds. So the time between the UK and Aurora was about somewhere between 50 and 60 milliseconds.
That seems like a lot in that world.
That's not actually, because that's across the
Really?
Atlantic, so that's pretty good. That's basically the speed of light.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was pretty good, but without having to do the hop through exchange architecture and bypassing London, that extra 5 milliseconds made a massive difference. And I'll get onto why in a minute. But by having, so to go back to actually before we went live, we had 3 basic signals. So our edge was our speed and our implementation. The signals were really, really simple. So the first one was order book pressure. So we were looking for imbalances in an order book. So are there more bids? Is there more quantity on the bid than the offer? And then we'd have a trade flow alpha. So we're looking at the normalized flow in the market. And then we'd have the third one would be what we would call a correlation, but really it was just leading indicator. So you're trading the S&P, you're looking at what the Nasdaq's doing. And if the Nasdaq moves and the S&P hasn't, you can make a bet that the S&P is going to follow. But the other thing it does is it helps the system stay in trend. So when we started switching on and testing, we just had two of these signals together, and it would be quite nice. It would just slowly make money, and then there'd be a dislocation in the market, and it would get run over because it was it couldn't react quick enough it could react quick enough, but there was too much noise in the back in the flow coming backwards and forwards. It's like, even though the market's moving up, there's flow coming in the other way, and that flow coming the other way was enough to kind of flip the strategy from long to short. Whereas having that correlation alpha or leading indicator alpha, it would help keep the strategy in the right direction, because that's the way the movement in price was going. So we then tuned this system so we were looking at 30-second horizons. We were trying to predict 30 seconds into the future, and then the system, would be a blend of these three. We'd weight these 3 signals together, in such a way to kind of produce a bell curve of signals, and then imagine the edge of that, 2 to 3 standard deviations. Those were the signals that we traded on, and it was a case of getting that frequency of orders firing such that we could, it would constantly trade in the market, and it would be always in. And the minimum amount we could capture was 2 ticks, because that's how much you need. 1 tick you're flat, 2 ticks you make profit.
Right.
And then we were quick enough that we could take any edge in the order book. So as you got that dislocation or imbalance, imagine it just the touch on an order book, and it's 100 by 100, and then one side starts somebody takes them off the offer, and it's 80, and then 60, and then 40, and that's enough of imbalance for us. We were quick enough to take that entire 40, and then we'd take that, but we'd always overtrade to leave something on the order book to then close that spread up, and then people would join behind us. So automatically, our first trade, we've traded to the point where we're now at break even, because we've moved the book up. We're now on the bid. We've pulled our order. There's people behind us. So if we got a signal in the other direction, we would then trade out at that same price, or the market would continue to move up in our favor until it reversed, and then we would go the other way.
So you're looking. So when the order book starts to thin out on one side or the other, then you're basically just going through there and sweeping that off.
Yep, completely. We'd never trade through. It would always be, we'd trade. We'd leave the order on the book for about 1.5 seconds, giving it enough time for other market participants to react to what we'd done, and then we'd cancel the remaining order.
Okay.
I think I've seen that happen a few times.
Yeah. And sometimes we'd get we'd pick up some of that adverse flow, so we'd get a position greater than what we were actually aiming for. So if there's 40, we might send 44, and we might pick up that extra 4 lots with just reverse flow. But then we would, our position limit for that product might be 100 lots. So then we'd then have that another chance to trade and in that same direction. So the position would be a combination of multiple decisions, for the better description. Now, in some cases, when the market was very volatile, we might just do the full position clip in, we might be going long 100, short 100, long 100, short 100, long 100, short 100. And we'd be doing that hundreds of times a day, to the point where in some markets we were, anywhere from 5 to 10% of the entire market.
Jesus.
Wow.
Was anybody else doing this at the time, or were you guys kind of like blazing the trail?
We were, like I said, my boss kind of had this idea, but he'd come from somewhere else where they did this, but they did it slightly differently. And I think they were a lot more profitable than us, but we were a lot quicker. At one point, we were the quickest people in the market based on the feedback we got from the exchanges, who could see everything on the other side. And so we always looked at what we called our fill rates, which was of the orders we send for the quantity that we want, how successful were we? And we went through a stretch on Eurex where our fill rates were 98 to 99% of everything that we went for. So when we did a reconciliation, we could run a simulation against the data that we I should have mentioned this actually before, against the data that we recorded to look at and see how similar our production performance was versus simulation. And there would always be some sort of gap from adverse selection and various other things, but it was a great indication. So as much effort for us went into making sure that our back testing and simulation was as accurate as possible, and that was measuring latencies across the board, making sure the market data we recorded was representative of what was happening in live. We tried to use as much of the same software for all purposes. So rather than having a simulation engine, we used our actual trading engine to backtest with. We just tricked it into thinking that the recorded recorded data was the real life market data. So then one of our edges as well was that when we connected to CME and CBOT, we would then fire over the data from for the S&P and the treasury bonds over to Eurex, and we'd use that data in the strategies, because if you want an idea of whether the Euro stocks or the DAX is going to move, and you've got information about what the S&P and the NASDAQ is doing before anyone else, then you've got an edge over everyone else in the market, on top of the fact that we can get to market quicker than anyone else.
That's why you needed the direct connection.
Yeah, exactly. So we could make those decisions as quick as possible. And, we were constantly analyzing the quality of the connections. So it wasn't just the speed that we were getting the data. We were looking at the gaps between the data that was arriving compared with when it happened in America. So what we wanted to make sure was that the variability in the data was consistent compared with in real life. So we swapped links a couple of times just because of the fact that the variation in transmission wasn't as good as we needed
for the latencies.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But also the noise created in the transmission of the information. So to one of our the quant's responsibilities was to not just looking after the strategy or working on new signals. It was like figuring out problems when they happened, and things were always kind of changing, under our feet. So funnily enough, like the first day that we switched on live was the day that it was the SocGen issues with Jerome Cavil, who'd been amassing these futures positions. So this also comes back to, we'd been working on like this promise that, don't worry, this will work. This is, I've got no doubt this will work. And, the guys I'm working with are like, well, yeah, we'll just build it, and, I'm sure we'll figure it out. And so
the day of turning that on, it had to have been terrifying.
Day we turned it on, I think we made like a high 6-figure sum on our first day just because the SocGen was liquidating massive Euro stocks and DAX positions in the market, and they were just, the market was just one way, and our system worked very well, but it was a complete shock, really, because we were just turning on, we were trading in very small size, and it was like, oh, it does work, okay, all right, maybe I will stay.
This might work out.
Yeah. Oh, this is a good idea. So, so to give you an example of some of the other stuff that, say, I used to work on, we worked very closely with the exchanges, and they were constantly upgrading their infrastructure and or their software. So they were while we were at this first place, we Eurex upgraded to, I can't remember the name of it now, it was so long ago, but it was a big overhaul of their market data and trading software. So you had you had two links. You had the market data links, and then you had the trading links, and they upgraded them both. And when they say that there's going to be an upgrade, they give you a paper with all the changes that are going to happen and access to an API to test, and you get to kind of test, write your software, test it against their system, and then there'll be a date where they decide, right, it's going live. So we go live, and our fill rates drop to like 75-80%, and as a result, our profitability drops massively, and we're like, oh my god, what's going on?
Wow.
This doesn't look right. So what we did was we're constantly recording the market data. So what we did was we recorded the data. We'd been recording the data, so we took a copy of it, shipped it back to London, converted it to the format that we used to. So all this time that I was doing my work in MATLAB, and so we'd convert it to a format that we could read into MATLAB, and then we could view it like tick by tick by tick. But each tick represented one either change to the order book or a trade. Now the old system was in Eurex was quite funny in that you get this where we get into the weeds a little bit. So the quote, you get the quote representing a trade comes before the actual trade. Okay, so it's not synchronous in that manner. So the order book would move, but you wouldn't know it had moved because of a trade until the next bit of information came, which was the trade. But then if you wanted to trade based off that trade, you had to reference the quote before
the previous quote that came before the trade.
Yeah. Okay. So when they did this upgrade, they changed it to be the trade first, then the quote, but that wasn't in the documentation. So our trading system was prefaced on that ordering, and once we figured this out, we were like, okay, right, the guys coders changed the system that afternoon, ready for the next day, and we turned on, and our fill rates were 100% for weeks.
Wow!
And I learned probably nearly, just under 10 years later, that some other people in the market who I worked with at a later date took them weeks, if not months, to figure out what this problem was. Because
I'm curious, did anybody was there any legal ramifications to changing that and not alerting people? You'd think that there'd be some lawsuits being slapped around.
Maybe, but not on our side, because we had such an edge.
You don't want to rock the boat and piss them off and shut your feet off.
No, we were just like, right, we'll just get our heads down and start working.
Right, and you figured it out on your own. It wasn't like they told you, only you guys, that there was a change. No, you figured it out.
And I think
anyone could figure it out. Yeah,
exactly. It was there to. It was there in black and white. You just needed to kind of know what you were looking for.
Right.
But I've got another example as well of some of the stuff that we used to look at. So there was so this comes into where, what we used to do was as much electronic plumbing as it was, coming up with fancy signals. So I was, me and the other quants were looking at a product called the DAX, which is closely linked to the Euro stocks because they share a subset of stocks. So they move very closely, somewhat like the NASDAQ and the S&P. Anyway, DAX is very much like the Nasdaq in that the order book's a lot thinner, so it's a lot harder to trade. But every time we try to construct a strategy, it would want to weight the bias towards this correlation signal, so this leading indicator, and that being the Eurostoxx. But every time we did, we couldn't achieve the fill rates of what was being suggested by the system. So we could never achieve, in theory, what the simulations were saying. So what we did was we went and looked deeper into the data, looking at it tick by tick. But also, what we would do is we would interleave the Eurostoxx and the DAX ticks. So we would look to see how they each arrived in line with each other, and then we were looking to see what was the trigger that was causing the movement in the price. So it was what we determined was that there was somebody would come in and buy 50 lots of Eurostoxx and then buy 10 lots of DAX, and he'd do it like time and time again. And it was that is what our system was picking up. So there was a but we noticed that the gap between the orders was quite large, and so.
But consistent, so that's how you knew they were correlated.
Yes, exactly. But it was it was a consistent gap, and we were like, I think there might be a trick here. So Eurex has two matching engines, and they have two data centers. One was called Equinix, and the other one was called Colt. And Equinix was where the German Bund, the Bobble, which is another German bond, and the Eurostoxx traded. The other one, Colt, was where DAX traded, the Schatz, which was the 2-year German bond, the Swiss.
What was the name again?
Schatz, SCHATZ.
Okay. Sounded like shat, like the past tense of poop.
Yeah. No. That's how it was referred to.
Okay.
The Schatz was shit.
Okay.
And so they were in two different locations. However, you could submit your orders to either of the data centers, and it would get piped over to whichever one it needed to get to. However, we had servers in each because we knew that there was a competitive advantage being as close to the crossing engine that you needed. So what we thought was this person at this bank or hedge fund was, they could have been doing this out of a spreadsheet. And so that adds latency. And if they were being lazy and submitting their DAX orders to Equinix instead of Colt, that was what was causing the latency. So we set up a strategy that was conditioned just on this one order in the market. And we managed to get our order in between. So anytime his Eurostoxx came, we were in there first, and then his order would come and move price. So we would take what he was after, and then we'd automatically get like this bump. So we deployed this strategy, and it made a fantastic amount of money. And then it just stopped, because this guy, we either arbed out the profitability of his strategy, or he's like, it's just not working anymore. I've given it long enough. I'm going to stop. And that's, and then it ended. So that's an example of where it's as much understanding the architecture as it is creating the strategy.
I think I'm following that, but I'm gonna turn this over to Robert. Do you have any follow-up questions on that you want to dive into?
That did make sense to me. I did want to ask a question though, kind of going back just to the order. When you place an order, what were your exits always just when the market switched and the quants decided to got a signal in the reverse, or was there a max position size you would go, or max lip ticks?
Oh, yeah. So every strategy had a position limit, which was a function of the size, the average size of the order book that we were trading. We couldn't trade with a position too high because we could get stuck. We wouldn't be nimble enough to kind of go long and go short. It was only if it took 100 decisions to go from short to long, that was too many. So our position limit was always constrained by the size of the order book. But we would always trade from signal to signal to signal. There was never any stop losses. There was never any profit targets. we were just constantly trading within the flow of the market. The only thing that could turn a strategy off was if it hit a drawdown on the day that was outside what we would consider the statistically acceptable for the strategy.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
Sure. I just had a question.
Go on.
I lost it.
Yeah, I had a follow-up
I was
question
about to make a
too.
note. Okay, go ahead, Robert. I'll let you do
No,
it. I'll see if I can figure it
and
out.
I also forgot my follow-up.
I'll keep talking, and when you remember,
Late
stop
in
me.
the day. We suck.
Longtime fans of the show should be familiar with the lender formerly known as Sue Pullen, and I'm pleased to announce that she's back, fresh off a rebrand and ready to help as Sue Mackey. Sue is a certified mortgage advisor at Fairway Independent Mortgage, an equal housing lender who focuses on finding the right product for you and your needs. She has over 20 years of experience helping thousands of homeowners. Whether it's purchasing, refinancing, or even a reverse mortgage, Sue will help. Sue's licensed in 36 states now, so reach out and let Sue Mackey it happen for you. The best way to reach her is to just give her a call at 520-977-7904 or in an email, spullen@fairwaymc.com. Fairway Independent Mortgage has an MLS number of 2289. Sue Mackey has an MLS number of 206048. That email again, spullen@fairwaymc.com. And that phone number is 520-977-7904. Shoot Sue an email and let her know she needs to update that address. Oh, God. No, it's fascinating. That's the problem. I'm getting lost in the conversation here.
There's some things I always wanted to know about this, actually. I mean, it's just, I guess one question is, are people still doing this?
Yeah,
What
I
you
would say,
described?
yeah.
Okay.
So Citadel still do it in a big way. Who else?
But they have the advantage of seeing the order flow.
Yeah, but they have multiple departments. So they've got
Okay.
one that handles that, and then they'll have a futures or Delta One department who are doing something akin to what I've just described. I believe. I can't speak with any surety on this anymore, but
Of course.
this is so. There's two elements of this. You know, we were kind of like low latency liquidity taking, whereas HFT is often, when people refer to that, that's market making, which is passively having your orders on the book, and you're constantly adjusting the location and size of those orders, and you're always racing to be at the front of the queue. So you're sending a high volume of messages to the market, whereas we were always throttled to like 2 seconds. We wouldn't trade any faster than 2 seconds because we'd always want to see what the impact of our order was on the market before you make another trading decision. You can't be trading before other participants have reacted to what you're doing. Whereas if you're managing inventory, say on the S&P, and you're market making, you're constantly adjusting your inventory based on whether you the position you have, and the signals that your system is telling you as where you believe like the fair price to be. So you're imagine doing that across the entire stock universe. So the sheer volume of orders that you're sending, and then having order flow coming in, is a massive edge, because we always refer to it as like a micro price, which is what's the mid of the bid and the ask on any stock or any future, and you were always trying to generate your own kind of micro price, which was where you believed fair value to be. Was it higher or was it lower? And then you could adjust the inventory on the book based on where you thought that price was, as well as also the inventory that you were happening. And this is where all the stock stuffing and market manipulation stuff that we've all heard about of late from what's his name, the other British guy, Flash Crash guy.
Oh,
I
forgot his name. Yeah.
So there was another guy actually called I think he was German. He was referred to as the Flipper, and he would. I first saw him when I was at this bank, and I was watching the order book just to get familiar with it, or and sometimes it's best to like these days, screen time and watching what the market's doing. And it was I can't remember, it was like 3,500 was the price, and then all of a sudden 3,500 popped onto the bid, and then 3,500 popped onto the offer, I was like, I spoke to one of the traders, and so I was like, "What? Is this normal?" He's like, "Why? What are you seeing?" And I swear I just saw the price pop onto the quantity. He goes, no, that can't happen. And then we're watching it, and lo and behold, it happens again. So, and it turns out that this behavior was massively detrimental to our strategy, because if you imagine,
Oh God, yeah.
we're looking at the imbalances in the book, and if somebody's coming along and massively manipulating the imbalance, then he encourages us to kind of like trade. So we're basically paying the spread, hundreds of times, and we'd have these massive drawdowns, and he'd do it like at a quiet. For European markets, you get this flurry of activity for in the UK it would be between 8 and 9 o'clock, and then it would be this quiet period until the US market opens, and you get like economic numbers coming, half past 8 your time. But in this quiet period, he'd just come on and he'd just, flip this quantity backwards and forwards, take some money from us, and then, call it a day. And
Wow.
He was actually trying to.
Yeah, he was baiting the algorithms in the market, and we kind of like semi complain to the exchanges, and they'd be like, "Yeah, but he's good for it," and we're like,
Right.
"What?
He's good for it. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
if you hit him, he'll take it," and we're like,
Right.
Okay, so we ended up having like software in that if we detected like these type of orders, our system would just stop trading, and
But then that just encourages them to get a little more,
Yeah,
instead of being, to finesse it a little bit better. Maybe don't go with such a large size, but maybe spread it out over a ladder or something.
Yeah, he didn't need to. He needed to have it close enough that it would
It would react to you guys.
It would react
or
to
you would
us.
react to it. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, it was fun. It's part and parcel.
It's almost like an arms race.
It is. It's there's a technology race. So we were constantly upgrading our servers. We had atomic clocks and everything, and we were constantly measuring, the latency of our software. What could we do to make it quicker? Anything we could do to get an edge. But so, kind of the next step of the story, I guess, is we our bank merged with another bank because of certain things that were happening in 2007 and early 2008, and it no longer became an environment that they were keen with our type of trading activity. So we ended up moving as a team to somewhere else. And at that point, my boss was wanting to go out to Asia, and I was going to go out to Hong Kong. And he found us somewhere to live, like another company to work for. But they had offices in Australia. And at this point, my wife and mine belongings were packed up in a container on their way to Hong Kong. So we had to quickly get in contact with the shipping company and saying, "Oh, that container that you've got, can you divert it, please?"
Whoops.
So we went out to Australia, and then we ended up that formed the Asian arm of the company. Well, the company was already based out there. We formed like an Asian desk, and then we started out building out the exchange links to all the other exchanges. So we ended up being on CME, CBOT, Eurex, Life in London, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea, Kospi in Korea, and the SFE in Australia. And then we had links between all of those, piping data to all these various places, because there was obviously for each period, like for Asia, for the Asian overnight Asian period, the London period, and then for the New York session, there was each session benefited from being able to see the data at different times. So during Asia, we'd send Asian data to the CME and CBOT, and then for the European session, CME their data would use in Frankfurt at Eurex, and then we'd be sending the data in Eurex over to the CME and CBOT as well for the RTH session, because CME CBOT is kind of like at the head in terms of importance, but it definitely benefited from having that data from the European markets, especially during 2008, where everything was moving in lockstep, and it was it was this amazing kind of time from a market data point of view, because the bonds were purely inversely correlated with each other. You could pull them up, and they were like ripple reflections on a pond or something. They just moved in inverse lockstep. So one of the best signals was using an inverse bond correlation on equities, and it was a real edge there. But so I went out there, and we slowly built out a desk and worked hard and made good money, and then it all petered out and fell apart due to greed and hubris and various other things. So,
on whose part?
Not my part.
Okay.
No, we ended up stuck out in New Zealand. We were going to be spun out and have our own company, and then it all kind of fell apart. And my wife and I, we'd moved out there with our newborn son and bought a house, and we were halfway through renovating it when it all fell apart, and we had to quickly finish renovating said house and leave the country before my visa expired, and we were no longer welcome in the country. So it was kind of a messy end. But
so it wasn't like, if that hadn't happened, you might still be there today.
Yeah, very much so. I think I don't know how it would have panned out. At the time, though, I'd wake up dreaming of tick data. It was, I feel as if I replaced certain parts of my short-term memory and long-term memory with, reams and reams of tick data. So, well, I say that, but when it ended, me and an ex-colleague, we set up on our own, and we had a go for a couple of years on our own, and that was a lot of work, and we ended up biting a bit more off than we could chew, and we had to kind of like call time on it. And the market's quieting down, and there wasn't the volatility there, and it was, I could come up with a whole heap of excuses, but in the end, we just made the decision that it was best to call it a day. And that was, at that point, I was done. I was completely over sitting at a screen and looking at tick data and worrying about all these small, tiny things.
That's a hell of a story, man.
Yeah, ticks and milliseconds. What it comes down to.
Ticks and milliseconds.
Probably the name of the episode.
We measured the performance of our engine in nanoseconds. It was we were really down in the nitty gritty, and then the atomic clocks that we use would measure down to that level of granularity on the data that we recorded as well. So it was electronic plumbing and data manipulation, really, and a bit of machine learning.
So let me ask you then, so you trade now.
Yeah.
You trade futures, right?
Yeah.
NASDAQ or any other specific indexes?
Mainly NASDAQ, but I feel as if I've been through the entire gamut of the retail trading universe on my way to where I am now. So I had like a bit of time off because I didn't want to go anywhere near the financial markets, and then because I worked in it for so long and I actually didn't enjoy it, I kind of came back to it. But I was like, I'm going to do macro. I don't have to stare at the screens, and it's look at this big issues, big problems, and quickly realised that was more of a cost center than a profit center. So.
Well, what's your definition of macro, though, after working in the nanosecond realm for so long?
Yeah, it was like, it was
10 seconds.
Exactly.
A minute.
Exactly. It was, I guess, an element of trend following based on, macro themes and, following along with other people's research. And if I'm honest, it was more the following along and just enjoying that kind of research side of it. But I realized it wasn't really something I wanted to do. And then, slowly over the years, it's just, I had a brief foray back into the financial markets with another company, but that's too close by to talk about, unfortunately. And
fair enough.
And then I think it was about, so I got, like everyone else, I got a little bit involved in crypto in 2017. And then I think it was about 2019 that I started getting into options, and I did that quite a bit. So swing trading options, which was, I think we've chatted a little bit about briefly in Vanta, and that was more like swing trading with options, and then doing various things around that, and then being positioned around ideas. Now, if I'm honest about that, it was benefiting from the bull market. It wasn't really that hard to make money during that period because
Yeah.
the inbuilt natural drift of the market added such a tailwind to things that even if you were wrong, things generally kind of started.
I think George
Sold.
Papazov said it best. It's probably 2-3 years ago. He said you could basically type your initials in and then just buy that and you'll do fine. I think that's the kind of environment it was.
Yeah, exactly. And then I ended up through lucky, not luck, but well positioned coming into 2020.
Yeah. Yeah.
And more that things can't go up any higher than this and what have you. But thankfully, with trading options, there's always a way to kind of express that view in the cheapest way possible. And the low vol environment meant that on the against I think some of the stuff like you've been talking about with Eric, you can position, you can swing trade, but then you can maybe divert some of profits towards insurance. And so I think I had a calendar straddle, and it was really nice because as the market moved up, you could just kind of like reprice it risk for zero cost as it just kept moving up and up and up. And then when the market actually did turn over, it did really well because it was you were long two options basically. Even the call, as the market tanked, the vol went up so much, even the calls made money. So it was yeah. But then after that, it was I discovered my bias, and it was I just fought the market over and over and over again, and it was I realized I couldn't swing trade because I had this bias. I didn't believe what was going on, and I had to kind of learn to fight against that bias. And then so slowly my timeframes dropped, and they dropped, and they dropped, and then then I slowly got back into futures, and then I realized that at that point I was like, wow, there's people actually doing stuff very similar to what I used to do on the retail side, and I'd not been back into that kind of space before, and that's where I came across various different people doing lots of interesting things, and there was a very old Discord called The Kingdom, or do you remember
Oh,
that?
yeah.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yep.
And I think Flurry was in there, and various other of the
Baba, I think, was in there. Baba and Banks,
and a whole heap of other people. Anyway, they're doing all this cool stuff, and I was like, oh, right, okay, this is pretty cool. And then it slowly kind of just almost relearned what I used to do from a completely different angle, added with the constraints of being a retail trader, I guess, and facing the biggest issue, which lies between the keyboard and the chair.
I'm curious what things you were able to take from your experiences as a quant and how that applied to your own trading. Like, were you able to utilize any of that stuff that you learned?
Well, first I'll tell you why it was the best and worst thing to ever happen, because trading for me was, well, you just turn up with an idea and you make a lot of money, and it works straight away. And you trade a system that has 10 down days in 4 years. And what's the problem? It's trading. Trading is easy.
Over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, it was like I had this kind of skewed idea of what trading was, and this real aversion to losses because I'd never experienced any. And it was to you could put a linear regression through our P&L lines, and there would be very little residual error in them. They were very, very smooth and consistent.
Why would they shut that down?
Well, everyone. This is it. This is one of the reasons I didn't want to go and work back in the industry, was that I'd met some really good people, but I've met some really bad people as well.
Yeah.
And one of the nice things about getting back into this side of things in the retail is that most people are really nice, and it's it's a much more refreshing place to be than certain places I've worked in the past. But on the positive side, I'm very good at, I'm a quick study at things, and I can, I'm not a very good programmer, but I know enough I can go into most systems and figure out what I want to do. So I quite like Sierra Chart in that respect, because I can pretty much go in and bend it to my will. simply because they provide so many examples. It's there's always an example of what you want to do, and then it's just a case of like taking it out and piecing it together.
I've tried. I've not had much luck with that. I've had much better luck with Python.
Yeah. So Python replaced MATLAB really in the quant world. When we started, MATLAB was kind of the go-to, but then more recent forays it was Python. But because of the limited C++ that I knew and could use, a hack basically, it meant that I was confident enough to go in and I could figure stuff out, because once you've got the basic concepts, a lot of things are the same. It's like speaking a language. I can order a beer in quite a few different languages, and it's the same thing with programming. It's like I can get it to do, say, the basics, and that's for trading. That's kind of just what you need, really. So
yeah, pretty much for Sierra, it's pretty straightforward. Any of them actually. Even Motive Wave, you need Java, but it isn't that much you need to know.
Yeah, and all the basics. It's a bit and an ask, a moving average here and there, some standard deviation stuff, and that's pretty good.
I think one of the most. Oh, I was just going to say. I think one of the most surprising things is how simple the strategies were. I was just curious if that's if that's like standard.
I've heard this from other people saying you could write most strategies on the back of a postcard. It was, I could write down the entire core concept of the strategy, in probably 4 lines, of maths, and it wasn't complicated, but the implementation was incredibly complicated.
But it seems like you want the programming or the actual algorithms to be as simplistic as possible, so that way the time it takes to execute those lines of codes is reduced.
Yeah, precisely. So we'd measure the performance of our signals just to make sure that we weren't spending too much time like stuck in a for loop, or that we were handling memory efficiently. But the
right.
the simplest, the simpler something could be, the better. Yeah, and a good example of this was, we had a really good edge, and so we would use genetic algorithms to do parameter searches, and it was a really nice way to do it, because it would produce this like population basically of parameters, and then it would mix and match them to come up with new members, which were evolutionary, based on the predecessor. So we had this, our kind of like search optimization was much more sophisticated than the trading system that we're actually using. And a lot of people have been doing this. I'm using machine learning and stuff in trading, but there was a lot of people doing it who were, it's the data you feed in that's as important as anything else, and you've got to make sure that the data coming in is of a really good quality, because otherwise you're just a grid, a computational grid, or a fancy machine learning model. It's just a fancy calculator, really. It's nothing more, and you've got to know what to ask, question to ask it to get the right answer, and then you've got to know how to trade it as well.
Robert, you started to ask a question there. I didn't mean to cut you off.
When so many things I want to say, actually, but so you're the old algo that you guys, and you could write it on the back of postcard, and I think that's from what my own experience and what I've read from other books, that simple is always the better option. But could you take something like that and just scale it up so that it doesn't require the nanosecond or even millisecond latency, but can look at seconds of data and maybe take a little bit higher level decisions based on looking at a little bit larger part of the ladder, perhaps, or something?
It depends on the signals were based on a return horizon almost. So we were trying to predict a 30-second return, and anything beyond that was just noise. So if we extended the prediction horizon,
That's just nice.
it's just noise, and the edge of the signal will go. It's
Yeah.
if you look at the market now, if you look at it on a really really fine time scale, you can see this auction backwards and forwards in the market as it's even when it's going up. It will say on Nasdaq it will auction up and down about 12 points, and it was those type of small oscillations that we were predicting, and it wasn't that we couldn't predict that the market was going to go up, but what we could do was, our position was a accumulation of those small decisions, and enough of those small decisions were going up, then we would be long. But conversely, if the market was low volume, then the same thing could be happening, but there wasn't enough flow or like directional flow in the market, and we could end up drifting short up while the market was drifting up, and and we'd be like our death knell was a trend day, because there's so little movement in the price, and I see it now all the time, and I sit there smirking that my old system would have hated that day, because what often happens is the order book gets skewed at the same time, so you're as the market's trending up, you're constantly trading short and trading short and trading short, because there's just so little movement in price. Whereas those days where you've got this massive back and forth movement, and there's all these traders out there screaming, "Oh yeah, I hate it when the market's chopping like this." Those chop days are when the algorithms are just like, "Oh, give me more."
Oh, that's fascinating.
Wow.
It explains why they're so hard to trade too.
Yeah, it is. And one of the markets we did worst in was the S&P, and it was only in hindsight, after reading various books, was that it seemed to be the playground for so many algos and nefarious characters. Nav Soro, who was the flash crash dude, but then there was this other guy who like his nemesis, I guess is probably the best word, and they were all playing these games on the order book. So it's like, well, how can you produce a signal with a decent edge when there's so much of this predatory noise in the market? Whereas we actually made a lot of money trading the treasury bonds, because they were boring and nobody really cared about them, and you had these kind of like more old-fashioned market makers who were really just inventory managing the order book, and we happened into it at a time where all of a sudden rates started moving all over the place, and there was liquidity fears, and so to bonds, we made a lot of money on the 2-year treasury, and then we didn't make any money on it because it would move all over the place, and then it would stop moving, because it was just purely a function of the perception of where things were going. So there's all sorts of different people doing different things out there, and none of it's easy, and especially for us.
We're getting kind of close to the end here, Robert. Do you have anything else you want to ask before we start to wrap this thing up?
Well, I don't know if this is a question that you can answer, but I look at the ladders of the order books on the DOM, and I've noticed over the last few years, I've been looking at that, like some different contracts will trade very differently on the DOM, like this versus CL, the U.S. oil, versus like S&P. They look very different if you're looking at the DOM. And what I noticed in particular is that, like in Sierra, you can get the push-pull column in the DOM, which is just showing you orders being at each level, orders that are being added or subtracted at each level. And in ES, they're pretty much kind of spread over, kind of distributed across different levels near price. And I limit my push-pull to just to be like 20 levels on either side. But on CL, it's really just the 2 or 3 levels right around price where almost all of the changes are happening.
Yeah, it was a tricky one, because you've got the WTI, and then you've got the Brent contract based out of ICE, which is the Intercontinental Exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people will and do arb off against the two of them. But
Okay.
the other thing is the curve itself with oil is a massive element to it. So people will play the curve on oil, and whether it's in backwardation or contango. So if somebody's market making the front month, they will also be market making the entire curve. So their risk will be spread out across the entire curve. based on my knowledge of it. That might not be 100% correct, but based on what I knew 10 years ago now, that's kind of how they do it. But to your point again with the size of the order book, so this can be massively affected by like the not only so the price of the underlying instrument and the multiplier. If they were to change the tick size or the multiplier of an instrument, it would dramatically change how it behaved. We were always after products that had really thick order books because they would provide more participants would be on there making decisions and putting orders. Whereas if the order book's really thin, maybe you've only got a couple of participants at each level, so you don't have that kind of like wisdom of crowds about what's going on, which is then why things are much more whippy and volatile, say like the Nasdaq. Whereas the S&P is slow, it takes much more volume to move price than it does on the other instruments.
And the bonds.
And the same with oil. People don't lay that as thick because there's so much risk in it outside of there's like the geopolitical risk almost. So no one wants to market make it too deep because if price shoots up,
right, they're offside.
They're massively offside. So which is what happens on news events. You see the order books thin out. That's people just basically limiting their risk.
Yep.
Every week.
All right. Anything else, Robert?
No, this is so. Actually, are you developing or thinking about doing any kind of automated trading now?
I do a little bit of automated trading. So I do it out of Sierra. I just have a couple of algos set up to do different things, and a lot of the inbuilt stuff in there is pretty good, especially around the risk management and all the difficult stuff on the back end that I always hated having to program myself. I can you can just come up with the signals and do that. But I think as a retail trader, it's everything else. It's all the different, it's the coming back to that word bias. It's like, having that kind of bias for today without like a personal bias. It's like what, I have a narrative of what I believe is going to happen. And then it's like trading around that using your signals. It's how kind of I view it now. It's like I might have a system that produces signals, but without the context of what I believe, that strategy might be flat on the day. Whereas if I say, right, just take longs because of we're above value or what have you, then I think that's where the edge comes in. I think there's that kind of like grey box approach as opposed to a black box approach. I'd love something I could just come in and turn on and turn off, but even with a system like that, you always end up spending the time at the screens. I was like, I don't want to do algo trading again because I don't want to sit in front of the screens, but you're going to be in front of the screens one way or another. You're either going to be doing it, looking at new strategies, figuring out why a strategy is not working, or you can be doing it just like, working and about, bigger picture things and how you're, taking the limitations of your strategy and how that fits into that kind of bigger picture view using various other tools.
So when you're trading with a mouse as opposed to a bot, I guess manual discretionary trading. So is it discretionary truly, or are you using like more systemic or systematic trading?
It's more discretionary. Okay. I just utilize a lot of signals. I wish, it's. I'd love to be at the point where I could do that again, but I'm not at that point yet. It's this evolutionary. What works one week doesn't work again the next week or month, or the things are constantly changes. Whereas it's kind of like digging out those truisms in the market, as opposed to I always say to people that the only constant in the market is change, and it's kind of like being on the right side of that change,
right? Or loose change, picking it up.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I used to do.
Yeah. Oh man, this has been one hell of a conversation. It sounds like we might have to do a follow up to this because I feel like there's probably a lot of untapped material we haven't gotten to.
Yeah, I've probably forgotten most of it.
Right. Well, I think unfortunately that means we have come to the end of our time with JM here. If you want to hear more, make sure you join the Discord, the Vanta. You can shoot him a friend request. I'm sure he'd love to chit chat markets with anybody interested in learning more. Also, big thank you to Robert for helping out with this episode. Again, shoot him a DM if you want to check out some of those tools that he's been working on, and maybe we can get the two of these guys collaborating to build some new tools for us too.
I'm up for that.
Definitely.
If you guys want that, hit that like button, hit that 5-star rating with the speed and frequency of an algorithmic trader, then take care. This podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only. It does not constitute financial or investment advice and should not be construed as such. The hosts, guests, and contributors of this podcast are not licensed financial advisors, brokers, or professionals. Any trading or investment decisions made based on the content of this podcast are solely at the listener's discretion and risk. Trading and investing in financial markets carry inherent risks, and past performance is not indicative of future results. Listeners should conduct their own research and seek advice from qualified financial professionals before making any financial decisions. The views, opinions, and information shared in this podcast are those of the individual contributors and do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the podcast creators or associated organizations. Produced by China Shop Productions.